And good evening everyone, and thank you for attending this evening for what is our second session in our Preparing for University Study short course. So I'll be guiding you through this evening's agenda, which we're going to talk about some learning styles and some different learning theories, which will sort of lead along nicely from the videos I hoped you watched last week from Dr. Stephen Chu that we had the links up on the Moodle site for, and some of that will have been useful for what we're going to talk about tonight a little bit. If you haven't seen them, it doesn't matter, you can go back and look at them, look at those again at a later stage, but that'll filter nicely into this. We'll also look at a little bit at the research process. So for those of you that may be returning, that may already be qualified at a university level and coming back into research, we'll look a little bit at that process and how that works, and the real core concept underneath that, which is critical thinking, which sounds pretty easy to do and sounds pretty straightforward, but there's some tricks to it. So we'll look at that. So critical thinking, critical writing. Then talk a little bit about referencing, which everyone despises, but it is a very necessary skill to have. So we'll look at the types of referencing styles that you can use, or some of them, and I would recommend certain ones that you're probably going to use more often than not. What makes a good or a bad reference, and how that relates to plagiarism, which is really important, particularly as you get through doing research. We'll have a quick look at some writing styles, the different types of reports or assessments that you may be asked to do while you're doing university study, but Chantelle's going to present more on those next week, so it'll really be an introduction to that, and a little bit on note-taking. So let's kick it off. So firstly, all of the following are really important skills that you need to develop, acquire, or build on in order to be successful at a tertiary level. You need to be able to identify your personal learning style. So how is it that you best learn? You'll see in subsequent weeks when we have a look at the online learning environment that Charles Sturt Uni offer, and we offer through IT Masters, you'll see that there's different ways, different methodologies that certain universities will use to help teach you. So there may be videos, there may be online quizzes, there may be downloading of, say, PDFs or Word documents or links off to other web pages. There you may actually attend lectures at some stage, you may attend intensive camps for a block mode. There's lots of different ways that you'll be presented information or asked to find information. And it's important for you to understand how you best retain that, understand information and retain that information, because it can really make it easier for you to study later on down the track. As I said, researching and critical thinking, it's not just for if you're doing an advanced degree, if you're doing a PhD or a research master's or honours year. It's equally as important in undergrad studies as well. Even through first year, and certainly going into second and third year of a university degree, you will be asked to write different types of assessments. They could be essays, they could be laboratory reports, there could be a practical case study, whatever the case may be. You will need to provide evidence-based information to back up what you put in your assessment. So in order to do that, you need to be able to research, know where to look, know how to find things relevant to your particular area of study, your particular assessment. And then leading on from that, you need to be able to critically think. So you may actually at some times, for instance, a couple of the courses that I've done, I've been asked to do a review of a certain area of study, for instance. So I had to go away and find 5 or 6 academic papers, journal articles that spoke about that particular topic, and then it was my job to pull them to pieces, find out where they were strong, find out where they were weak, and write an opinion, a review piece on that. So it can be very useful to critically think about things. That doesn't mean we criticize, it just means that we look at the information that a paper or an article or a person or whoever it may be is presenting, and we think about whether it sounds right to us based on our experience, our knowledge, what we know about the world, what we know about the subject. Okay, everything matches up, great, extra information. And sometimes you can't really answer that question whether it sounds right because you don't have enough knowledge. You need to be able to learn the skills that enable you to get enough knowledge, to build enough knowledge, to look for enough pointers to help you make those decisions. We look at some different writing styles, which I'll wait until we actually get there, until we talk about it. And obviously referencing is a really important thing, particularly in academic writing or research as you go later on. Some people I often hear talking about referencing as being a way that prevents you from actually having your own individual thoughts. And that's partly true in a way. If you're involved in a large research study, you have to be able to find a niche point in the research, a gap in the research, a gap in the literature, so to speak, so that you can try and push the boundaries a bit further. So in order to do that, you need to be able to research literature, read up on it, critically think about it, critically review it, and then lastly refer to it in your own writing to say, well, I've looked at this is what these guys found, this is what my experience or my testing is showing me. So referencing is a really important skill to learn, not one that most people enjoy, but it's really useful for you. Okay, so if we look at the personal learning styles for a start, we need to answer some very key questions. So how do I best learn? How do you best learn? What modalities of teaching suit you best? How do you receive, understand, and retain information the best way? So do you know? You may not know. You may never have thought about it, but it's important that you do. Why should you care? Well, you should definitely care, because the more you know about it, the more you can personally tailor your own learning at whatever university or whatever course you're doing. The more you're going to retain, the more you're going to get out of the course, the more benefit it's going to be to you. So it is important that you understand this. So how do we find this out? If you don't know, how do we find this out? There are a number of different theories, and these are only three, but there's certainly more, but there are a number of different theories which have been discovered or proposed over the years that describe different characteristics of learning, if you like. So one, for example, is Myers-Briggs, which is it's been very popular in use in psychometric testing when people are being hired or interviewed for jobs for many years now. Most psychologists now would probably say that it's a little bit outdated and not quite as accurate or evidence-based as what you would normally like to use nowadays. But it's a way of determining your alleged psychological type. So with your introverted or extroverted as an example. And from that you can get an idea of how you may best learn. So that's one theory. There's then another one is the Kolb inventory, which basically focuses on abilities that you as a student would need to develop in order to learn more effectively. So they could be listening skills, they could be writing skills, they could be visual, they could be kinesthetic skills, they could be mechanical skills, so movement patterns. And that focuses on a lot of different skills and abilities that it's suggested that you try to learn to become more effective in your retention of information. And then the last one I just want to look at briefly before we go into the one that we're going to talk about is the theory of multiple intelligences. So I like this one in a lot of ways because in this theory it breaks it down into 8 different intelligences to describe human learning, and you can read them there. And you can see that those 8 different intelligences are very different, or maybe very different in particular to what you view as being intelligence. And I think it's important to recognize that not everyone is intelligent in the same way. There was a great quote by Einstein which said, when he said, everyone is intelligent in their own way. He said, if you were to measure a fish's intelligence by its ability to climb a tree, then it would spend its whole life thinking it was stupid. And I think that's a very poignant and penetrative remark. I think it's important to remember that we are not all intelligent in the same way. Typically intelligence, the contemporary version of intelligence thinks about people's ability in maths, science, English, those sorts of core studies. But I prefer to think of intelligence as being much more diverse than that. So could we say, for instance, that someone like David Helfgott, who those of you who don't know him, is an Australian pianist, extremely good, top world-class pianist, but ranked quite, he's schizophrenic, and he ranks quite low in some areas of contemporary intelligence, yet as a musician he's absolutely amazing. Would you say that, could you dare say that he is not intelligent? He's intelligent in a way. You look at athletes, for instance, someone like Usain Bolt may not be, and I don't know this for certain, but he may not be great scholastically or maths and English, but certainly has great visual spatial intelligence as an athlete. Obviously, verbal linguistic, logical mathematical tend to fit more into the contemporary version. Bodily and kinesthetic, being able to feel things. Dancers, for example, also go back to rhythmic and harmonic intelligence. Great dancers. For instance, the great choreographer, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but the one who choreographed Cats, for example, and worked with Andrew Lloyd Webber, was a fantastic dancer and choreographer, but she was terrible at school. And she was lucky that she had a great experience with a psychologist. She had trouble at school. Her mother took her to a psychologist. And he said, he asked her some questions, and then he said to her mother, I want to talk to you outside if I may. And he took the mother outside, and as he went out of the room, he turned on the radio and he just watched her. And when they went out of the room, she got up and she started dancing, because that was how she felt she could think. She had to move to think. And the psychologist made the point to her mother, there's nothing wrong with her. She's not stupid, she's a dancer. Put her in a dance school. And she did, and it changed her life, and she became the great success that she ended up being. So it just goes to show, don't always think that because you're not good at maths, or you're not good at English, or you're not particularly good at what is considered a contemporary type of intelligence, doesn't mean that you can't succeed at university level. Very interesting theory, and I think one really worth thinking about. Okay, so which one are we going to talk about tonight? Which one do I think is useful for you guys? So it's called the VARK, and we'll look at it, acronym, we'll look at what VARK stands for as we go through. So we're going to, as part of the activities for this week, I'm going to get you to fill out a VARK inventory. So it's basically a little questionnaire that will help you to determine your learning style using the VARK methodology. So the VARK inventory focuses on how learners prefer to use their senses. So you might already have some idea on what the VARK may start to stand for. Knowing your VARK score may help you develop your learning strategies or tailor your strategies to enable you to be better in your education than what you may have previously been, and help you to succeed further on down the track. So VARK, what does it stand for? Firstly, the V is visual. So if you're a visual learner, you prefer to learn information through the eyes, through your visual senses. So it may be through charts, graphs, reading. Okay, well actually, no, I shouldn't say that, not specifically reading, but through charts, graphs, other visual means, so seeing things happen. So it doesn't mean reading, it means looking at symbols, if you like, so it's very symbolic. Oral, you prefer to hear information. So you can sit there with your eyes closed during a lecture, look like you're not paying attention, look like you're asleep, but you're actually listening and taking everything in, because that's your preferred method for learning. Read write. Okay, so this is where this is also sort of visual. Well, obviously it has to be if you're going to read, but it's basically that you prefer learning with words. So you like the written word rather than the symbol or the picture or the demonstration or the chart or the graph. Okay, so I know myself, I'm probably more a visual and kinesthetic, oh, I've given it away. So last one is kinesthetic. So I'm probably more of a visual and kinesthetic learner. I prefer to see pictures of things or demonstrations or objects and I can learn, then look at someone and imitate that, and then, as it says, kinesthetically, learn through experience and practice. So actually go through that process, and that's the way I tend to learn best. The thing to keep in mind is that all four of these sensory methods are not exclusive. So you will not be an exclusive visual learner or an exclusive oral learner, so on and so forth. There will be, but you may indeed prefer one over the other, or you may prefer a couple. So as I said, for me, it's visual and kinesthetic. A very good friend of mine is definitely a read-write, much prefers read-write. That doesn't mean to say he doesn't learn in the other ways, but that's his preferred method of learning. So when he studies, he prefers to read a book or read journal articles, okay, or send off emails with questions to people. He writes things down. When he's doing studying, he'll go through lecture notes. He will write notes, extra notes during a lecture, because that's the way he prefers to learn. As soon as he reads them or writes them down, it helps to take them into his long-term memory. Whereas me, I like to look at things. For instance, I've been a martial artist for many years, and one of the reasons that I was successful at being I've been successful at being a martial artist is because I'm able to learn by looking at someone, looking at them from different angles, top, bottom, left, right, behind, front, and then taking that away and practicing that repetitively. So just trying to imitate what they've done. Interestingly enough, I always say that it was the way I learned how to bowl as a cricketer as well, that I watched a guy called Dennis Lilly. For those of you that aren't familiar with cricket, it's not going to mean much, but a bloke called Dennis Lilly, who was an absolute champion of the sport from Australia, and I would watch him bowl, and then I would go out and try to imitate him. And although I certainly never played for Australia, it gave me a way to learn. So for me, that works well. So this week it says hurdle task. It's not a hurdle task. I just want you to, there's a VARK questionnaire that's available on the Moodle site. I want you to take that and fill it out. Spend a bit of time. It might take you 5-10 minutes, but I want you to fill it out. Have a look at it and see whether it resonates with you. See whether you agree or disagree with it. You might find that initially you'll fill it out and you'll go, no, I disagree with that completely. That's not me at all. But think about a time when you've been successful or you've learned something successfully and try to see whether it fits in, okay? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And then I'd like to, if you want to, discuss and reflect on your particular VARK questionnaire by posting to the Week 2 forum. So share it with us. Tell us what the VARK questionnaire said about you. What were your preferred learning styles? Do you agree? Do you disagree? How do you disagree? Why do you agree, or why do you not agree? Useful. It'll help you to move through the process and work out what study strategies potentially are going to benefit you as you enter university life. So now if we move on to research. Okay, so research is a vital skill to have if you're going to be doing tertiary courses. As I said before, it doesn't have to be at PhD or master's level. You're going to use research skills even in first year. No matter what subject, no matter what course you're doing, what subjects you're doing, there's going to be a component of research in there. Because lecturers, teaching staff are not going to give you all the information. They're going to give you information which is relevant to certain learning objectives that the subjects have, but you then need to go and build on that information and perhaps fill in some gaps. Because with any university course, there's some assumed previous knowledge. Okay, it might be general knowledge, it might be specific from subjects that you may have done at high school or in other courses in maths, English, science, whatever the case may be. You need to be able to make those links. Okay, now as a university course from first to third year, as it builds, more links will be made for you, information will be provided. Often people find, and this is something I didn't mention last week, but often people will find, and I certainly had that same feeling in all the courses that I've studied, in all the degree programs that I've done, and I'm now into my third, is that the first year is a bit like, okay, we've got all this new information coming in, none of it seems to be related, but I'll take it in anyway. Then in second year, there starts to be a few little bridges built between the subjects that you've done, the information that you have, but still there's a lot of gaps. And then in third year, generally getting towards the end of third year, that's when all of a sudden the penny drops and you start to see the links that you hadn't seen before between the subjects and why the course was structured that way. Sometimes looking at a course outline can sometimes make not a lot of sense. Can't see how the things meet together. But they're all designed so that by the time you get to the end of that third year, you are then armed sufficiently to go out and start work and be productive in your new environment. So research is vital to all of that, because you can't possibly know all the answers, but you should know where, and it could be reasonably expected that you know where and how to look for answers. So no one can expect you to know everything, but they can expect that you know where to go and look. So some major resources. If you're Charles Sturt University, then the library is the main resource, one of the first places you would go. So that's the main library page here, and then this one here is a link to library guides. So the LibGuides are basically produced by the librarians for each subject area or each study area. So there will be, one potentially, so for instance, there might be one for nursing, there might be one for physios, exercise phys, computer science, mathematics, so on and so forth. Whatever course you're studying will have a LibGuide associated with it, and that will contain a number of different resources, which could be searchable databases, so research databases, they could be textbooks or other resources with physical resources within the library, websites, could be anything you could think of, TV programs, online videos, all sorts of resources that you can use. So if you're ever stuck with trying to find out what sort of resources, what can I actually use, first port of call should always be the library. And that's true of any university that you're going to. Okay, so whether you're at La Trobe or Monash or Melbourne or ANU or Harvard or Oxford, or it doesn't matter where you are, University of Mumbai, it doesn't matter where it is, that library resource is your primary resource once you get started. Obviously you're also going to have access to your academic staff, your teaching staff, which may be able to help you, but generally they will often just push you in the right direction, say go here and go there, look at these places. So there are a couple of really good resources that Charles Sturt University have. As I said, the vast majority of universities will also have a similar setup, something. Google Scholar is also a useful tool, particularly if you link your Google Scholar account, so your Google Scholar account with your university in question. So if you do that, if you set up your Google preferences in Google Scholar to say, all right, I want to look at resources that are relevant to, say, the Charles Sturt University Library, then everything you search will be tailored based on what the resources are in that library. So you're not going to get things that potentially may not have access to. Because, for example, when you do searching of online databases, research databases, you can sometimes get passed off to links to certain databases that the library isn't a member of. So even though you might be able to find the abstract of the paper or part of the detail of the paper, you won't be able to get full access to it because it is not available in your library, and therefore your student account through the library won't get you access to it. However, if you configure your Google Scholar so that it does do that, then you will have access to all those resources. And there is lots of other resources as well that is available on the internet, in books, in public libraries, other people that you know through other organisations. So if you're in allied health, for example, you may know people who are doctors, you may know people who work at the hospital, at the local hospital. You can use all resources, any resource is valid. The only thing I would say is when you are doing research is make sure that you use what are called credible references or credible resources. So for example, an example of a really awesome good resources would be a journal article or an academic paper. Okay, great. journal articles are often they go through the process of what's called peer review. So someone will have done an experiment on some given area. They'll then submit that paper. That paper will be reviewed by many different other people in that same field, and they will either confirm or deny those results. If they've been confirmed, then that paper then becomes part of a great resource bank. So that's an example of something really good. If you're working in the IT industry, if you're in the IT field, for example, if you are doing an assignment which was involving, say you were doing a case study, a practical case study on a Windows environment, Windows Server environment, then an excellent source of reference would be Microsoft TechNet library, for example, or Microsoft papers, the white papers that they publish. That would be acceptable because they're experts in that field. Okay, so what is never a good reference is something like Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is a public accessible database that can be changed and managed by lots of different people. It might provide you with some information which might guide some of your knowledge or give you some thoughts and ideas that you can then go and research, but as a reference, never any good. Same things like even lecture notes. Okay, people who your lecturers that provide lecture notes, those lecture notes are not considered to be authoritative. Okay, so generally you steer away from those when you reference, and we'll look at that more as we go on. Point is, there are many other resources, many other things available to you. Just be careful how much weight you put into each of those resources, because some are much better than others, and we'll look at that in a minute. And of course, your own knowledge. Your own knowledge is definitely a source of information. Things that you may have done in the past, either through study or work or just your general knowledge, just your life in general, can be useful in your university course. So for example, my previous work in many years in the IT industry and previous study in psychology and IT have not been for nothing. Even though now I'm studying exercise science, I've been able to take some of those skills and implement them in my new environment quite successfully, particularly psychology, but also the IT to a different degree, not so much in helping clients and in placement situations, but in being able to understand new technology that I have to work with as we learn it. It allows me to pick things up a little quicker than I otherwise would have had I not had that background knowledge. So don't ever think that you're leaving your knowledge behind. If you change, particularly if you're a job changer. One of the things for me, I guess, was in my career change, it probably took me 4 years longer than it should have, because I didn't want to leave that knowledge behind. I thought, I've worked so hard to get that knowledge, I'm wasting it if I move forward. Didn't turn out that way at all. So don't ever think you're leaving things behind. Everything is of value. Okay, so critical thinking, or CT as we'll refer to it from now on. So Einstein said, education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. And again, Albert was obviously a fantastic physicist, but certainly wasn't a genius in all areas, all endeavours of life. But he knew that education is not just rote learning. It's not just reading a book and citing off some statistics and some well-known facts. It's about training your mind to take those facts and then implement them in different contexts and being able to apply the knowledge that you have to different contexts. So if I use myself as an example, if I was studying exercise science and I knew, for instance, that the recommendations for aerobic exercise for the average person is 30 minutes every day of moderate level exercise. Okay, every day you should do 30 minutes of moderate level aerobic exercise, which is heart rate between 63 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. Okay, that's great. Now I might have that knowledge, I know that, but if I can't then take that away in my clinical practice, working with people and actually apply it, then it becomes a useless fact. Okay, so the other thing I need to do is to critically think about that piece of information. Now it's a guideline. Does that mean that we have to do 30 minutes in one single block? Absolutely not. You don't have to do that. If you have a patient or someone who's recovering from, say, a cardiac event or coming back from a cancer operation or a car accident, they may not be able to do 30 minutes of continuous aerobic exercise. They may only be able to do 10 minutes. That's okay. You do 3 lots of 10 throughout the day. So it's that ability to take that guideline, critically think about it, and then apply it to your individual situation that you're in, the individual context that you find yourself in. That's important. It's the ability to take that information and think about it and then apply it. Very important. And that's part of critical thinking. So Albert, I'm not sure whether Albert actually said this or not, but he's been credited to it in this picture. He said the internet users of the 21st century will need the critical thinking skills to know which quotes attributed to me are genuine. I think that one's probably not genuine. I don't think he probably said that for a number of reasons, but I'll let you decide for yourself. So critical thinking, becoming serious again, is basically about never accepting things outright. Don't accept things as literal dogma or verbatim as people tell you. There are more often than not, there's two sides to every story. And if you hear a piece of information, you need to be able to take it in, evaluate it critically and say, does that sound right with what I know, what my background is, with what my experiences are? And more importantly, even if it is, can I apply it to the context in which I find myself now? So is there some piece of knowledge you've been given, sounds great, yep, sounds great and looks great and I believe it, but can I apply it in this situation? And if you can't, then you need to find some other way. So you need to evaluate and compare to what you know from your experience, what you know from your previous studies, okay? And ask questions, always ask questions. Always seek to try and clarify points if you're not sure. And sometimes even if you are sure, take a little step back and look at it a little bit more critically and see if there might be something that you're missing. It takes a little bit of practice to do, but once you get into that practice, you'll be amazed at how much more you can learn, how much more in depth your learning experiences will be. You also need to clarify, compare, contrast, apply, and discuss. So as I said before, this is where you get to the point where you have some knowledge, you've been given some information. Now you have to decide whether A, it's applicable to the context you find yourself in, and B, whether you can actually apply it, whether you have the skills to apply it, whether you have the background knowledge to apply it, whether you have the time to apply it. Okay, so it's always about thinking outside the box, so to speak. Critical thinking is essential to your development. Okay, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to say as a student, because I think it's more than that. It's essential to your development as a student, as a practitioner or a professional or a clinician, whatever it is that you're doing, and more importantly as a person and as a human being. Okay, you shouldn't ever accept things 100%. Always think about them, evaluate them. So why is it important that we do this from an educational perspective? Okay, if we just look at university, for example, why is it important that we use critical thinking? Because it's known, and I would expect you to critically evaluate these statements here, perhaps go and do some research and think about them. Typically, students who develop good critical thinking skills achieve higher grades, are less dependent on teaching staff and textbooks for their information. They actually create knowledge because they're critically thinking about things and bringing in other pieces of information and knowledge that they may have and bringing in their background and bringing in context, and they're starting to build a knowledge base, so they create knowledge. And they evaluate, challenge and change structures. So they're great researchers. They evaluate and challenge the norm, the status quo if you like, and they change things and they evolve them and they move on. And that's really important, particularly in science or medicine or in any field, really. It's important that we continue to evolve, that we don't do something the same way now as it was done 50 years ago just because it was done that way 50 years ago. Now, I'm the first to agree that there are plenty of things that were done 50 years ago or, however long, any time span you want to talk about, that are still applicable today, but there are also many things that are not. And we need to try and critically think about everything we're doing. Okay, so in our learning, in our teaching, in our work, in our home lives, critically think about the way we do things and think, is there a better way? We're not here for a long time. Okay, in terms of how old the earth is, we as humans are here for a very short period of time. So it makes sense to make the most of it while we're here. And critical thinking skills help us to do that. So I don't expect you to listen to these points or any of these points and just accept them. I want you to go away and critically think about them and do some research and think and ask the question, was Matt right on that? Where did he get that information from? Is it based on good studies, on good evidence? I can tell you it is, but I want you to go and ask those questions yourself. Critically think. So, how do we develop our critical thinking skills? So in order to be able to successfully critically think, you need to have 4 core skills. You need to be able to interpret information. So that's understanding the significance of the data or information that's put before you and to clarify what is it actually saying? What does that actually mean? If you can do that, that's tick number 1. You then need to have the ability to analyze. So break information down into its component parts, so data, and recombine it in different ways. So pull something, think of it as, it's like if you look at an English sentence, there is often more than one way to say something, isn't there? We know that as English language speakers. Or any language, I guess that's probably true. And so you can break down individual sentences, put all the words back together in a different order, and come up with a similar idea. Sometimes you come up with something completely different, but you can also come up with a similar thing. There is more than one way to write a story. There's more than one way to write a letter. Okay, so you need to be able to break information down and then recombine in different ways to be a good critical thinker. Tick number 2. You need to be able to reason. So that is create an argument through logical steps. Logical, rational, sequential steps. So break something down, interpret it, break it down, and then see how it fits together. Does it actually make sense? Or does it seem like a load of old rubbish based on your knowledge, based on your experiences, based on what you're learning? Okay, there's been plenty of theories, plenty of academic papers that have been published that turned out to be less than truthful. And a number of reasons for that, which we don't need to discuss really, but the important thing is that when you're reading, always take that approach of trying to reason through your way through whatever you're reading or whatever you're looking at, whatever you're learning. Does it make sense? Is it logical? And then lastly, evaluate it. Judge the worth, the credibility, or the strength of that information. So you'll come across plenty of, and I'm sure you will have come across plenty of things in your life that are novel, interesting, funny, take your attention, but at the end of the day, are they worthwhile for what you're trying to do? Okay, are they worthwhile for your area of endeavor? So for instance, the game Angry Birds, a lot of fun, keeps people's attention for a long period of time, but how worthwhile is it compared to what it is that you're trying to study, what you're trying to learn? Good for a break maybe, but come back. Okay, so you need to be able to judge the worth of something. I know that's looking at a game, but you need to be able to judge the worth of the information you're looking at. How credible is it? Where did it come from? Did it come from the guy next door? Did it come from someone on a blog? Did it come from a tweet? A Facebook post? Hopefully not. Wikipedia? Or did it come from a well-known, credentialed academic resource or did it come from a well-known, well-credentialed and respected industry source? If that's the case, then it's going to be more credible than, say, something from Wikipedia on a Facebook post. So you need to be able to do this all the time. Okay, not just, a good way to do this is not to read a newspaper article and go through this process. It's often I give people newspaper articles or point them to a news report and say, go through that and practice your critical thinking on that. Often they're easier to look at. It's often easier to pick the holes in them. Because let's face it, you know, good news is good, bad news is good news is no news, as they say in reporting. So often, and often outlets, journalistic outlets will apply a certain spin on things. They'll have their own spin, their own way of thinking about it. So you need to be able to develop critical thinking. Best place I can think of is to go and have a look at some newspaper reports, read a newspaper, read a news website, and try and break some of their articles down and find out, you know, whether you really believe them or not based on what you know. Always compare it back to what you know. So critical, which leads on to critical thinking and reading. So when reading, we have three main things that we need to do. Three main things that are important for the end critical thinking result. So you need to be able to provide evidence to confirm or deny whatever the point of the article or document or book is, or chapter, or whatever it is that you're reading. Provide evidence to confirm or deny a specific point. You need to be able to evaluate how valid that point is and how important it is. So that goes back to that worth and credibility, yeah? And then lastly, you need to develop reflective thought and tolerance for ambiguity. So tolerance for ambiguity just means that sometimes you can come across articles or resources that will provide what seems to be differing points of view or differing sides of a story. You need to be able to tolerate that and see how it applies, how that knowledge, irrespective of that ambiguity, may apply to whatever context you're in. And a reflective thought really is just looking at something, looking at an article, looking at a point, looking at some evidence, and reflecting back again, tying it back to what you know. What do you feel? Don't rule out your gut. Sometimes your gut is a really good measure of things, sometimes. Okay, so develop that reflective thinking. And then later on, write down what it is. Reflect on that particular article as an example. And so there's two ways of reflecting. You can reflect the article on what you know, and then you can take that reflection further later on down the track at a later time and reflect on what you've learned from that article and how it applies, what you remember. In writing, this can be really important for assessments. So things like critical reviews or persuasive essays. Critical thinking can really help, particularly in critical reviews. It can help you enormously. So a critical review, for those that don't know, is basically taking a body of knowledge, so a literary work or a group of literary works or research articles, and interpreting them critically, and then writing a summary or writing a review of what that work is about. So do you agree with it? Do you disagree? If you do agree, why do you agree? If you disagree, why do you disagree? Persuasive essays are another example. Critical thinking will allow you to develop and present a nice, structured, logical argument to support whatever it is that you're trying to persuade people about. So you might be trying to persuade them that the Hawthorn Football Club is better than the Collingwood Football Club, for example. And you need to be able to critically think about that statement, critically think about the evidence that's clearly there, and then develop and present a logical sequence of arguments in order to persuade your readers that you are in fact correct. Which of course, you know, all good football followers would already know the answer to that anyway. So writing strategies, critical thinking writing strategies. So again, even though it's writing strategies, reading critically is a big part of it. Because in order to be able to write authoritatively and critically about something, you need to have read critically about it in the first place. So it may seem there's a bit of I'll get out in a minute, there's something that's ambiguous. Read critically. I'm talking about writing strategies, but I need to read critically. Okay? Be fair. Try not to be biased. That's very difficult. We all have bias. In some way, we all project bias. But we need to try and be as fair as we possibly can when we're writing critically. As I mentioned before, we need to use evidence from authoritative sources. So not Wikipedia, not the guy next door, not the local blogger. Okay, authoritative resources, journal articles, well-established texts, respected industry sources, respected academic sources as some examples. Consider alternative perspectives. That's obviously a huge thing about critical reading and critical writing. Okay, you've got this piece of evidence, you've got this information, but is there something else that might explain it? For example, I get hay fever at this time of year, ostensibly because there's lots of pollen in the air. But could there be an alternate answer? Could there be something else that's triggering it? Could it just be other allergies? Not hay fever, it's other allergies. Is it dust? Is it other things that could be considered? Always consider alternative perspectives. Don't just jump at the first thing. Use inclusive language, so be gender neutral, not she said, he said, male, female. That's all gone by the wayside now, so we need to be gender neutral. And we need to be talking in non-absolute terms. So often, not always. Okay, so you can't say to someone, you always do this, because no one ever does anything always. They'll do things sometimes. It may be more prevalent than something else, or more often than something else, but they don't always do it. So think about how you can structure your writing and your thinking so you're not thinking in absolute terms all the time. As soon as you start thinking absolutely, you can really block your ability to take in information and block your ability to then think about that information and apply it elsewhere. So critical thinking is a really important component that I can't emphasize more, that you really need to try and develop those skills in order, and the more successful you become at learning these skills, the more successful you will be in your university education. Seems a little bit, may seem a bit overwhelming to a few of you, but it's not. It's all something that's well within your capabilities. Anyone can learn to critically think, you just have to practice it. So as I said, go back to your newspapers, news reports, take it through there. Okay, so a quick look at writing styles. So there are a number of broad categories of writing styles. So we can look at formal or non-formal. So that's a bit, difference between writing, say, a letter or a speech, formal or non-formal. So if you're writing a letter to your grandmother, it would be non-formal. If you are writing a letter, an application letter for a job, it's obviously going to be more formal. So there's that sort of difference, a formal, non-formal style. There's business writing, there's scientific writing, and then lastly, the one that you guys will probably see the most of in your tertiary studies, there's academic writing as well. So that's ability to write academically and convey in an academic way a particular idea or thought or set of information. If we drill down on the academic style, because that's more relevant for you guys, these different styles of writing or different assessment methods which require different styles of writing are different depending on the area of study that you may be engaged in. So some of the types of writing you may be involved in are essay writing, which Chantelle will look at next week when we break down an assessment. So an essays typically follow a certain structure. So they'll generally have an introduction where you will talk a little bit about what it is you're going to write about in your essay, why it's important, and some background information to build the story. The second part of an essay will be the discussion or the body of your particular essay. And in that, you will critically think about the essay statement, the evidence that's around that supports or denies that particular statement, and you'll write about that in your discussion. And then lastly, you will generally have a conclusion where basically you do a quick shorter summarization, hit the dot points, the important points of what you've already written about, and finish off with a statement or a paragraph about how this particular area could perhaps be enhanced later on down the track. So in other words, areas for further research. Okay, that's a basic idea of an essay. So a report, on the other hand, is where you will actually maybe go and do some observations. So if it's a lab report, for example, you may have to go into a laboratory, perform some certain tasks using certain procedures, and then you need to report on that. So a laboratory report will again generally have an introduction. So this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. You then will have what's called a methods section, where you're going to say, okay, this is how we did what we said we were going to do. Then you'll have some results. These are the results we got from our testing, bit of analysis, goes into the discussion. So then we say these are the results, this is what they mean, and then lastly you finish off with a conclusion, again summarizing the bullet points, and then so bullet pointing the topics within your body, and then options for further research. So that's a report. Similar to an essay in some ways in that you've got the introduction, discussion and conclusion, but with a report you'll also may have a methods section and some data in there as well that you've collected and analysed. So a little bit, usually a little less wordy than an essay, and a little bit more, more tables, graphs, pictures, so a little bit more visual than the essay, which I read write, obviously. A case study is where you will be given some information. So for instance, if you're working in the allied health field, you may be given a patient, and that patient will present to you with a number of different symptoms and a number of different maladies. And it's up to you to, from that case study, determine what course of action you're going to take to try and identify what's wrong with this person, and then how you're going to address what you determine to be wrong. So what treatment plan are you going to put them through? How are you going to get them to a state where they're less sick, to where they're better or back to normal? Okay, so that's an example of a case study, but it could be on any area of endeavour. Could be IT technical, could be business related, could be mathematical, could be science-based, could be anything. Okay, but it's just an idea of what a case study is. The literature review. So a lit review is often something that you'll do before you embark on a research project, and it can be something that you will practice particularly regularly in years 2 and 3 of an undergraduate degree. And basically a literature review is about picking a topic. So you might say, okay, a topic might be, a little research topic might be, how does intensity of exercise affect someone's heart rate? So then you might go off and you'd try and search using your searching resources. We talked through the library, through Google Scholar, through your academic databases. You would do a search on exercise intensity and heart rate, and you come up with a whole heap of different articles. Your job is then to grab those articles to a set degree. So you may grab 5 if you're doing second year literature review. If you're doing third year, you might grab 10. If you're doing a 4th year honours or in preparation for a PhD, you may do tens or hundreds of articles. You would read through those articles, critically pull them apart, find out what's good and what's bad, and put them into a literature review. So that's the process of a literature review, looking at other people's research on a particular area and critically evaluating it, writing about it, and putting your own view forward. And then the last one, the big boy, is the thesis. So the thesis is, and it does contain a lot of the other elements that we talk about there. So a thesis is part essay, it's part report, it's part case study, and it's a very big part literature review. So all of those things will feed into a thesis, which at the end is your final submission document for a research master's, an honours year, or a PhD. So that's talking about the top end of town, so to speak. And often a thesis can be in the tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of words, but typically in the tens of thousands of words. So you've got lots of scope. So next week, Chantelle is going to look more at writing styles, particularly essays, so assessment types. She's going to be talking about assessments next week, and one of them that we're going to pull apart is the essay, and she'll be able to drill down more on that next week. But if you have any questions on what any of these things are, there's some resources that will be up on the Moodle site for you to look at that will explain some of these in different detail, not necessarily more, but different detail. And of course, you can always email or post questions on the forum or ask them at the end of this evening. So the last one, last section we need to look at was referencing. Most people hate it, but it is vital, as I said earlier. The best place to start is this particular web link here for Charles Sturt University. Every university will provide you with lots of different resources with respect to referencing. It is an absolute non-negotiable when it comes to academic writing. If you write an essay, case, any of those writing styles that we just talked about, if you do any of those, then you will need to reference to some degree. There are also a number of different referencing styles. Some of you may have heard of the Harvard style, APA, a Journal of Sports Science and Medicine. There's lots and lots and lots of different referencing styles. The one that most universities will accept in most courses is APA, which is American Psychological Association. That doesn't mean that it's specifically to do with psychology. It's not, but it's a reference style that you can use and be safe in the knowledge that the vast majority of universities will accept it, particularly here in Australia. I'm not going to go too much more into referencing because it is a really complex and really broad subject. There are a number of resources that are up on Moodle that I've used in that I deliver at the start of all the subjects that I are involved with through Charles Sturt Uni and IT Masters, and I urge you to have a look at those and get an idea about referencing. The earlier, if you are contemplating going into university study, the earlier you start on referencing, if you're not already across it, the better it will be for you, because it is quite a challenging skill to develop. A mundane one, yes, I agree. A finicky one, but certainly worthwhile having a go at. And the last thing I wanted to put up is a note, and I think this is really important. When you're thinking about, I'll just read it out first and then I'll briefly discuss it. A gentleman called Albert Hubbard said, "If I supply you with a thought, you may remember it and you may not. But if I can make you think a thought for yourself, I have indeed added to your stature." And I think that's a really, it hits the nail right on the head. And I would urge you again, through the talking we've done tonight, to critically think about that particular statement. So what he's saying is, I'm not going to give you the information. I'm going to facilitate a way in which you will think about things, critically think, and come up with your own knowledge. And that's really important. And I think the best teachers I've certainly had in life are the ones that don't give me the answer, but help lead me to the answer for myself. So they facilitate that thought process and allow me to think rather than just rote learn, because that's always better. That's always better. So thank you, everyone. That's basically it for this particular session, this particular webinar. But if you would like to ask any questions, we will, obviously I'm here. Chantelle's also here in the background, and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have right now. So far away. But that's it for this evening. If you have to go, feel free to go. We'll see you the same time next week when Chantelle will be talking about assessments. But if you have any questions, please fire them away straight away. Thank you very much.
So while you're typing out any questions you have, one of the notes I have in all the assignments that have ever been marked is every single time we call out a student for marking with Wikipedia, for referencing with Wikipedia, they always bring up the fact, and it's a true fact, that Wikipedia is actually more reliable than most encyclopedias and a lot of textbooks and that sort of thing. And it absolutely is, and you're completely correct. However, that being said, it's not a reliable source because you can change it, and that's part of the reason. It is, however, a great place to start for an understanding of a topic a lot of the time. I just thought I would chuck my 2 cents in there. I found it really useful if you are writing about a topic you have no experience on, and they ask you to talk about it and you're like, I don't know what I'm meant to say about this. Sometimes it's a good place to get a basic understanding and then to use the links at the bottom of that Wikipedia page to get further understanding. So it's a valuable tool, it's just not anything you should ever reference in a university paper. So I just thought I'd chuck my 2 cents in there so that you guys all know what it's like, and we don't want to call you out for referencing Wikipedia, but it's just not a valuable tool in that sense. And yeah, like Matt was saying, next week you're stuck hearing me talk all night probably, just about getting practical with how to approach an assignment. So a lot of people look at an assignment and don't know where to start, and that's what we're going to be looking at next week, and how to interpret what your lecturer is asking for when they write an assignment question. I think I said last week, Matt, I wish there was a way that we could see if anyone was writing a question.
Yes, it's very difficult. You get the pregnant pauses, but looks like we might be fresh out of questions, so we must have done pretty well tonight. I just want to say, actually, I don't think what you put in them was 2 cents worth. I think it was probably worth more of $1. That you've hit the nail exactly on the head. Wikipedia is still a really valuable resource, as any resource is, but as you've said, it's not what we would call academically sound. But for you hit the nail right on the head. I can't add any more to it. It's great.
And I can tell you a lot of people who've studied really serious topics have gone to Wikipedia at the start of the thing on, okay, send me somewhere where I can understand the basics, or I can
Absolutely
get a starting off point and I can go from there. And even articles you'll download will all have references to other places that will be useful and relevant.
Absolutely. I think the point that you made before is that it can be more reliable when you think, because we talk about academic papers being peer reviewed, and obviously Wikipedia is the ultimate in peer review because it's always there, it's always on. The only thing is you can't ever be 100% sure that someone hasn't just edited and put something in that's not quite right. So, but yeah, still an excellent resource, as you said, for gathering that initial general knowledge and then giving you an idea of where to go subsequently.
Yeah, I think we might not have many questions tonight, so I imagine there'll be questions next week when people start talking about their specific assessments that they're looking to tear apart, and it should be a pretty full-on week next week, but hopefully we get down to the practical nitty-gritty of how to approach an assessment.
All right, fine. Okay, so that sounds good, Chantelle. All right, everyone, thank you for your attendance tonight, and we'll see you, or you'll hear us, or more correctly, hear Chantelle sometime next week. Okay, thanks.
Okay then, bye guys.